The Legend of Zelda franchise, famous for its items, quests, and dungeons that shape the way we interact with the world. As a speedrunner, you want to avoid doing any of that. Take Majora's Mask for example. You're presented with a goal: explore the world, defeat the 4 dungeon bosses, and obtain the remains to unlock the moon and defeat the final boss, Majora. Considering that this game has the fewest dungeons in the series, that should be no problem. However, aside from traditional challenges found in the series, this game uniquely introduces a 72-hour clock, which restricts the amount of time you have to save the world. For the average player, exploring new areas, finding hidden items, and then finally, unlocking the moon takes countless hours. Even for speedrunners, with all of their tricks, it would still take over an hour. Until 2019, when the single most impactful discovery was made, a glitch that changed the game forever. This is the story of stale reference manipulation. Now, let's not jump to conclusions. Before SRM's discovery, speedrunners weren't just messing around. Being a mainline Zelda title, they tore this game apart with hundreds of glitches and skips. We could see this by looking at Anop's run from that year. It shows gameplay vastly different from your average playthrough. Hey, look at his masks. He's missing one, right? The game expects you to explore Snowhead Village to obtain the Goron mask and play a song to stop the strong winds that are blocking Snowhead Temple. Instead, Anop used a glitch called Hyper Extended Super Slide to make it up the mountain. He doesn't have any issues inside the dungeon either, using glitches such as bomb hovering and recoil flips to navigate past important puzzles and skip the boss key entirely. This wasn't isolated to Snowhead either. Every major area has ways to skip items, bypass side quests, and even get to the bosses right away. Large skips are no stranger to Zelda speedrunners. By this point, all of the games had ways to skip a dungeon, if not all of them. Unfortunately, this was not the case in Majora's Mask. One stubborn requirement remained: the boss remains collected from all 4 dungeons were needed in order to reach Majora. The community found ways to skip almost anything in the game, but this one final roadblock seemed impossible. After 5 years of using the same route, most had given up hope that the status quo would ever change. Community members would often joke about wrong warping to the moon, or taking this guy's advice and just bomb hovering there. Attitudes got worse when its 3DS remake got some insane glitches that weren't even close to working in the original. Little did everyone know, a team of glitch hunters were working silently in the background for a while now, and they found something. In August of 2019, Fash found a way to access the debug menu. This was a leftover from development that would allow speedrunners to put any item from the game in their inventory, even those tedious remains that previously required beating the dungeons. Despite the desire of many community members for something absolutely game-breaking to be found, this was not what they were hoping for. Controversy ensued, where some felt that the glitch shouldn't be allowed, stating that using the debug menu runs counter to everything speedrunning is about. Accessing the menu was mind-numbing, requiring runners to play the Song of Storing 70 times in a row, taking 12 minutes. This was definitely faster than beating all the dungeons, but replaced exciting and skillful gameplay with boring menuing. Others felt that since it was accessible in the game without cheats, it had to be allowed. However, accessible might have been a strong word, considering that the menu crashes on N64, doesn't exist on GameCube, and is impossible on Wii VC, leaving the Japanese Wii U Virtual Console as the only option. Not only was this a version that most people didn't own, but it also suffered from horrible input delay. So things were still bleak for the Majora's Mask community until October of that same year. First, let's go back. In 2016, Majora's Mask speedrunner Full Grown Gaming was doing a 100% run when this happened.
Dude, speaking of Squash, he should be getting back from his exam pretty soon, I think. What? 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 What is that? Hello?
Yeah, his bow just shot a door instead of an arrow. Oddly enough, weird things like this happened to many players and were documented as early as 2009, but went unexplained until October 10th, 2019. Glitches and Stuff posted an Ocarina of Time video that demonstrated throwing a boomerang at a Skulltula token in the Forest Temple. By adjusting the camera while exiting and re-entering the room, a door was flying through the air, stuck to the boomerang. This unassuming trick quickly became known as stale reference manipulation, or SRM. Before I get any deeper into the history, I'll need to explain how SRM works. It's a bit tricky and honestly pretty intimidating, but I'll simplify it as much as I can. The programming concept that SRM exploits is called a pointer. Like the name suggests, a pointer directs to the memory location of something relevant to the game at that moment, telling it where the data it's looking for can be found. Any programmer trying to manage pointers will tell you that they can be quite easy to mess up. As it turns out, even Nintendo's professional developers fall victim to them. There's a few ways that pointers can be misused, but here's a relevant example. Imagine having a pointer to some place in memory. If the data associated with that pointer is no longer at that memory location and some other data is there instead, the pointer should be reset so information isn't being written to the incorrect spot in memory. But if the pointer isn't reset and is still being used, then information will be written over whatever happens to be there. At its core, this is what SRM is doing, abusing a dangling pointer or a stale reference to manipulate a memory location to write data where it shouldn't be. Glitches and stuff confirm this with that boomerang video. When you throw the boomerang, it attaches to an item and brings it back to you. It does this by creating a pointer between the boomerang and that object, so the XYZ position of the boomerang will be copied to the memory of the object in question. This creates the illusion that both objects are traveling together. That pointer exists as long as the boomerang is loaded, and by keeping the boomerang active but unloading whatever it picked up, glitches and stuff prevented the game from resetting the pointer. Now, if the game uses that memory location for some other data, the boomerang will modify that data as it believes that the object it's carrying is still in that memory location. So glitch judges began salivating at the possibilities. Well, how broken could this really be? Could you give yourself any item in the game? Sure. Set flags to complete quests? No problem. What about warp to inaccessible locations? A community member named... Oh, it's Fash again. Fash theorized that you could use SRM to make owl statues even more useful. In Majora's Mask, there are 10 owl statues spread across the world. They're mostly used to warp between areas and save your progress. Each owl statue has its own ID number ranging from 0 to 9. When loading an area containing one of these statues, the game saves the statue object along with its ID number. If a statue's ID number happens to be higher than 9, it starts to behave in strange and unintended ways. By using SRM, you could change any value you want, so Fash's goal was to get the Southern Swamp statue to have an ID value of 14 instead of its usual 7. Southern Swamp was chosen because performing SRM has a lot of prerequisites, and this area happens to have all of them. In general, speedrunners will do incredibly precise setups in locations with some type of freestanding load trigger, like these, and interactable objects. Here, using the Zora fins to grab the rupee, much like Ocarina of Time's boomerang, will set a pointer from the fins to the rupee. If you leave the area before the fins return to Link, it unloads the rupee, but the pointer remains. Now doing this setup will modify the order objects are loaded. If done correctly, the statue now has a new ID number of 14. With this new ID number attached to the statue, once used, it will warp Link to various locations around the map, depending on how many notes were last played on the ocarina. Playing 6 notes and saving at the glitched owl statue will send Link directly into Majora's lair. After nearly 20 years, the Majora's Mask speedrunning community had found a useful wrong warp, and straight to Majora no less. Finally, those boss remains were no longer required. The controversial debug menu was officially slower, and excitement had been brought back to the game. The world record dropped from NOP's 1 hour and 15 minute time to 48 minutes, and then down to 37 over the course of just 3 days. Keep in mind that 23 minutes of that is just the initial tutorial section. So the owl statue's wrong warping method was game breaking, and it only required a few items: bombs, the Zora mask, and a bottle. But that was just the beginning. Just a few days after the owl SRM had been implemented into runs, another glitch hunter named Mr. Cheese had an idea. He pointed out that the same concept should become even more powerful by manipulating the values of objects Link can carry. This is known as carry SRM. Let's pick up this pot. See how it moves up and down to follow Link's breathing animation as he runs around with it? Just like the boomerang, when Link picks something up, it creates a pointer between Link and the object. Before, only two sets of data, height and distance, were being manipulated. However, carry SRM adds the rotation value of objects to do even more crazy stuff. There's a ton of areas where this can be done as long as it meets the general conditions we outlined earlier. After some theory crafting, the community put their attention on the Deku Palace. It fit all the requirements needed to set up carry SRM and would require fewer items in order to moonwarp. These guards function like little loading zones. When Link gets caught by a guard, it looks at a value to figure out where to throw him. Normally that should be outside the palace, but with SRM we can modify this value. When you super slide with an object in the environment, letting go of the R button will end the stored grab state and stop your slide. Even if you're really far away from whatever you picked up, Link will still grab it in his new position. If you do the same action, but cross a loading plane, when you end the slide, the object won't be loaded anymore. In this state, you'll see speedrunners doing something called function pointer manipulation. It's a variation of SRM that allows invisible objects in Link's hands to execute existing code in the game based on the object's rotational value and other objects that are currently loaded in the area. When done correctly, the guards will send Link to the moon. With this discovery, any percent no longer required Zora Mask or a bottle. The new routes ultimately became a race past a 23-minute tutorial, then to the Deku Palace, doing carry SRM to moonwarp, and finally fight Majora. World record times dropped from 37 minutes all the way down to 28 minutes. Later that year, carry SRM was implemented into categories like all masks and 100% when it was discovered that you could use SRM to edit chests and obtain any item that you wanted. You could even get items that are normally only attainable in Ocarina of Time, but still exist in Majora's Mask source code, like Sun Song, which allows for new crazy routing opportunities. It's hard to believe, but in February of 2020, SRM became even more broken. It allowed speedrunners to do the ultimate exploit, arbitrary code execution. Ace allows players to take complete control of the game and essentially change anything they want. Yes, anything. Seaborn made a video that covers how Ace works in a super accessible way, which will be linked down below, so I won't be explaining it here, but suffice to say that being able to literally write your own code in the game is extremely powerful. This led to any percent speedruns racing to the Astral Observatory, with only a bomb bag in hand to warp to the credits in 24 minutes. For nearly 20 years, the speedrun of this game had clear restrictions which limited the runs to somewhat resemble a casual playthrough. But in a period of less than 6 months, SRM changed the game into something completely unrecognizable. During the making of this video on November 17th, 2021, Turkenheimer discovered how to skip the tutorial section at the beginning of the run. Previously, Majora's Mask runs were plagued by a 23-minute tutorial, dubbed First Cycle, full of cutscenes and gameplay that was nearly impossible to save or lose time during. In this section, you were stuck with a limited toolset of Deku Link and forced to continue as intended. Because of this, any percent could only go so low. However, this changed when Turkenheimer discovered a method of SRM that could be performed with the tools of Deku Link. With help from the community, a setup was developed that allowed players to obtain a mask, which allowed you to transform back into Human Link, and get some additional items to beat Majora's Mask in under 20 minutes. You might be wondering where this game could possibly go from here. Due to the extreme differences between the style of run before and after SRM, categories that used major glitches like SRM and Ace were separated from the older style of runs. Doing this has kept interest alive, as those who like or dislike SRM each have their own leaderboards. However, SRM still remains nearly as controversial a topic as the debug menu once was. Whatever happens, I think that we can all agree that stale reference manipulation changed Majora's Mask forever. If you want to learn more about some of the unbelievable stories from the speedrunning community, make sure that you subscribe to this channel. This has been Zalux, and thank you for watching Lowest Percent.